I've been wanting to write about this trip for a long time. It's a very deep spiritual trip I had, and it affects me even to this day. I've already been watching trip reports before this trip even happened. However, the thought of speaking on it never even crossed my mind until later. I'll just be straight to the point about everything. Growing up, I was raised by parents who strongly believed in Christ. I strongly believe in God too, but I know not everyone does. I have nothing against people that don't. I had a best friend, we are still close to this day, who always wanted me to swear or say something out of pocket in school growing up. I never did as he said, and unlike me, he swore, got high, and just overall knew more about mature topics than I did. One thing we always had in common is we often made jokes that other kids would say were out of pocket. My parents divorced when I was in 5th grade. A lot of negative events in my life happened since then. I didn't immediately change, however, in high school. I started with smoking heavy amounts of nicotine through vaping until I got nick sick, which is basically lightheadedness and nausea from so much vaping. Usually this happens on an empty stomach. I did this almost every school day for the past 4 years, and last year I was at my worst doing codeine pills, hydrocodone, lean, cigarettes, alcohol, and finally shrooms. The weed I smoked half the time came from carts, or sometimes would be bud from someone I didn't know too well. But it would always get me very high, and I found myself having to take much bigger hits and holding them in longer, because they didn't hit the same. A lot of times I'd be high to the point where I kind of felt disconnected from reality, but even when sober, the effects lingered. So now to the trip. I forgot what day of the week it was, but it was during spring break. My best friend has always been in contact with me because we play a lot of games together. I went over to his house and brought my PC, a wireless keyboard, monitor, and a mouse. We loaded everything up in his dad's car and left. As soon as we got to the house, we started drinking vodka. I was around 6 shots in, but did not really feel anything yet. I knew I was intoxicated. My friend gets drug tested, so he can't smoke, but he can drink and do shrooms. The next day I started with smoking some weed, and then we decided to buy an ounce of mushrooms. We got the shrooms later on that afternoon. Keep in mind, this is my first time ever doing shrooms. I ate 2 of the raw psilocybin mushrooms with my friend, and we started walking outside. About 30 minutes after, we were walking around the streets with ear-to-ear smiles on our faces, laughing, looking at the sky, and talking about how it looks like a picture. 10 minutes after, the effects just kept picking up. My body felt very light, and I remember saying, I feel like everywhere we go, we just get there. It doesn't even feel like we're walking. That was the best way I could describe it. It felt like I was floating or hovering off the ground, and everything was HD bright. My friend said he saw cockroaches running down the street, which I took for an exaggeration, but I'd have the feeling something was in the corner of my eye. We started walking back to his house, where we saw his dad's car parked outside. We walked to his car looking dead at the windows to see reflections of ourselves. We busted out laughing, because we knew we looked completely different. My friend describes it as seeing everyone's true form, and we described ourselves to look like hairless monkeys. That was really what I saw it as though, from the perspective I had, my friend looked like a wild animal. We got back inside and started playing games on our computers. We'd set up our PCs by each other, since he has an office room that has enough space, and started playing on it. When I sat down, I knew this high was going to be different, because I got into the game and everything starts vibrating. It's as if the lights are kind of moving and have their own wavelengths. My friend shot a rocket launcher on this game and it caused immense lag. The explosion had smoke rising and his screen was stuck on this frame of just smoke piled on top of a building. My friend said, "Dude, those look like faces." And he was referencing the smoke, that it somehow looked like floating ghost faces or something. I just thought in my head, he's tweaking out. But then I looked at it deeply myself, and it really looked like a floating baby made of smoke with a large head, but no features. Strange, however, my friend's parents made some chili, and we decided to put 5 grams into each bowl. After the fact, we ate 2 more. Then I finished it off by hitting a blinker on my weed cart. When I hit the blinker, my friend gave me a look. He himself is a shroom head, just far more experienced in doing them, and I could just read everything from the look he gave me. I could tell I fucked up. When I sat down after hitting this blinker, I was in the room by myself when my friend left to get some drinks. I looked up at his poster on the wall that had a Marine saluting on it. However, instead of saluting, I kind of saw him waving at me and looking at me. I always saw something in the corner of my eye, mistaking it to be my friend's dog, even though the dogs were in the living room. I then left my body within minutes. It felt like seconds of me just sitting there. Time had no meaning to me, and I became the room. The way I was looking at life was as though I was at the top of the ceiling looking down at myself and the entire room. I just stood up because I couldn't believe how high I was. I tried to convince myself it was just an ordinary high. Nothing worked. I tried to walk and I felt 100 times lighter than before, 1,000 times lighter as a matter of fact. Honestly, I was so light to the point I felt like I wasn't in my body quite literally. Each action I did, I didn't realize I was doing, even walking. So when I walked, I kind of walked on my toes and couldn't really control myself. I held it in while my friend was around, but it took everything in me to not tweak out. It was getting late, and my friend had to take me back home. We loaded everything in the car, and when I got in, it was pitch dark inside this vehicle. I couldn't make out anything of what I was seeing in that car. Even the outside lights just all seemed like they were a part of each other. Everything outside the car was just kind of non-existent to me. It was like I was sitting in a void with blurry lights all around shining in. These lights kind of looked like they were watching me. And when my friend and his dad got in the car, they just looked like floating heads in this darkness. I was tripping out. So I started looking for my phone, which was in my pocket, and looked at the time, but didn't know what time it was. My phone didn't even look like my phone when I held it. So I put it down the first time because I thought it was his dad's phone, but then realized it was mine when I put on my lock screen. I looked at all of the games and apps on my phone on the home screen, and I start zoning out. The reflection of the phone was in the side view of the window I was sitting in, on the right side, and I could see it in the corner of my eye. My vision would just hyper-focus on this small reflection on the window and expand into these colourful geometric patterns. I felt extremely depressive for a moment. I couldn't do anything about what I've done to myself. I had a song on too, to try lifting my mood, but the song just sounded like a different language, and I couldn't even comprehend the words. I got home. This was around the time my older brother got kicked out of the house, so I was already in a bad mindset just being at my house. When I opened my bags, that had my stuff, it was as though I was looking into a dimension that I couldn't touch from where I was standing, even though it was physically possible. I went to my room, talking to myself a lot. I turned on Skyrim and started trying to wait for the trip to fade out, but it kept getting stronger. I had turned almost all the lights on in my house. I went downstairs for some strange reason. I bent a fork and then put it in my pocket. I left a lot of cabinets open in my house, and I would just be walking around the house having self-dialogues for a while before I tried laying down. Then I felt like I was either peeing myself or bleeding down my leg constantly. I would put my blanket over me, but I'd feel extremely uncomfortable with this sensation. When my blanket went over my body, it felt as though it became a part of my body. I couldn't tell the difference between me and the blanket for a minute. So I kept looking under my blanket every couple of seconds to make sure I wasn't peeing myself or bleeding. I also felt like I wasn't breathing, so I had to steadily control my breaths, and that caused me to lose control of my breathing patterns. So sometimes I really wouldn't be breathing. My leg would just violently shake every couple of minutes, and it felt like my chest was doing the same thing. That was when I went to my bathroom and looked in the mirror, and then I broke. As I saw myself, my pupils were huge, going in different directions, and I looked zombified, just dead on the inside, completely. Everything around me was blackening, as though I were being swallowed into a black hole. For such a long time I stood there, looking in the mirror, losing my mind, not making a sound or anything, just staring at myself, and I didn't even really have control over my body at this point. I then fell to the ground, saying, I died, and I can't believe I fucking died. I thought that whatever just happened to me is permanent. I didn't know how to think. I've always been an overthinker, so at this point everything just became a thought. Every action, everything. Not a thought I'd even think about, but just a thought. However, the things I thought didn't affect what I did. I remember being on the phone with my friend that night multiple times, asking him mid-conversation, wait, am I tripping right now? Am I on the phone right now? I was standing up, talking on the phone, but thought I was laying down in bed. I kept returning to the mirror in my bathroom every few minutes. where I fell to the ground and kept saying things like, "I'm in hell." I couldn't believe the fact I died. For some reason, I looked at the blinds, and the sun appeared to be out. Bluish lighting shone through the curtains, kind of like in the morning. But I had forgotten it was midnight. In my vision, I saw tears that had eyes in them watching me. They didn't look like normal eyes, but rather like a celestial being's eyes. I don't know why I felt it, but there was a strong presence of these eyes watching me. I started talking through my older brother's voice, saying, "I can't believe this happened to you. Now it's too late. He had been given warning after warning, and now it's too late," he said. And these things I kept saying and hearing. I didn't even make myself do it. I was getting peak hallucinations and was in total confusion. It was nothing I did or think about. So when I was doing these things and felt as though my brother was standing over looking down at my body, I was just in shock. I didn't know what else to do except fall to the ground. I tried to cry, but that didn't work. And when I closed my eyes, I saw a lot of movement. It looked almost as though I were in a grey assortment of clouds that just had a violent storm in them that I could not leave. When I saw this different aspect of reality, I knew for certain I was dead. At this moment, I saw myself wearing a red hoodie with no shirt under it, just waiting to die. I then put the same outfit on and went outside through my front door. But then I just blurred out, "What are you doing out here?" As if it took everything in me to just say a short statement and went back inside. I did that without thinking too, which means I could have easily gone outside and done anything else. A voice started talking through me that was very deep. I won't say it was possession, but it was as though the shrooms took over. My voice had never sounded this deep before. When I had spoken, I shouted a lot of things. It's as if death was talking through me. I then looked down at my body, except my eyes weren't open, although I could still see for some reason. I couldn't see real life, but rather the street that I currently live on. It goes downhill into a lot of neighbourhoods, and on that street, I saw an image of myself laying there dying, bleeding from my leg as though I were wounded. However, I looked at my leg to see it was bleeding because of the fork I had placed in my pocket before. It was just jammed into my leg at this point. I didn't feel it. With the amount I was tripping, I was more worried about the trip than my pain. This trip lasted from the afternoon till early in the morning. When I lay down, I finally woke up in the morning to see a lot of geometrical squares coming out of my TV while Skyrim was on. I would see the wind blowing in the mountains where the greybeards are, and just patterns of squares and shapes pushing out of these wind gusts like tears or something. I woke up the next day, and it was as though I'd just experienced a rebirth. I did not see life the same. I've taken high doses of shrooms at school after the fact, just tripping casually, but this trip has affected the way I see life. I am often in depersonalization. Every thought I had to think on extra hard. It's harder for me to put memories together. Basic things I usually do, I just kind of stopped doing in my life. And I'm always here, but mentally I am not present. I don't even think I'm present when I talk right now. Everything in life just goes on now. Of course, I can still do anything I want to do, but I know a lot has changed. It was especially that first trip I had that changed my entire outlook on everything. I don't think the same way I used to at all. It feels like almost everything I do now is subconscious.